Bigfoot can't be killed. From 1941 to 1960, Bigfoot continued to put in enigmatic appearances in the 5th and 6th decades of the 20th century. In 1941, too many people near Mount Vernon, Illinois, saw a large baboon, and although it was hunted, it eluded capture. A report in Hoosier folklore details some sightings, beginning with one in the Gumcrete Bottom near Mount Vernon during the summer of 1941. A preacher was hunting squirrels in the woods along the creek when a large animal that looked something like a baboon jumped out of a tree near him. The preacher struck at the beast with his gun barrel when it walked toward him in an upright position. He finally frightened it away by firing a couple of shots into the air. Later, the beast began to alarm rural people by uttering terrorizing screams, mostly at night, in the wooded bottomlands along the creeks. School children in the rural districts sometimes heard it too, and hunters saw its tracks. By early spring of 1942, the animal had local people aroused to a fighting pitch. About that time, a farmer near Bonnie reported that the beast had killed his dog. A call went out for volunteers to join a mass hunt to round up the animal. The beast must have got news of the big hunt, for reports started coming in of its appearance in other creek bottoms, some as much as 40 or 50 miles from the original site. A man driving near the Big Muddy River in Jackson County one night saw the beast bound across the road. Some hunters saw evidence of its presence away over in Ocala. Its rapid changing from place to place must have been aided considerably by its ability to jump, for by this time, reports had it jumping along at from 20 to 40 feet per leap. During the time that this baboon was being seen in Illinois, Mrs. Jeannie Chapman lived through a terrifying afternoon 1,800 miles to the northwest in British Columbia. It was a fine day in September 1941, and she was at home with her 3 children aged 9, 7, and 5 in a small, unisolated house near Ruby Creek beside the Fraser River. Her eldest son reported seeing a cow coming out of the woods, but when she went to look, she thought the creature was a bear. As it came nearer, she could see that it was a huge, hairy man about 7 feet tall, wide-shouldered, and with long arms. The hair was pale yellow-brown, about 4 inches long. As the creature seemed to be making for their house, Mrs. Chapman grabbed the frightened children and, shielding them from the creature's view, shepherded them away to the safety of the village. Later that day, George Chapman returned home from work and found the house deserted. He was rather alarmed to find huge 16-inch long, human-like footprints everywhere and a broken woodshed door, but then he saw his family's tracks beside the river, not followed by the huge figure. The cabin at Ruby Creek, British Columbia, was abandoned by Mrs. Jeannie Chapman and her family in 1941, following a visit by a Bigfoot. A photograph taken in 1957 shows the cabin. It seemed that, after the Chapmans had fled, the Bigfoot had looked around and broken open a 55-gallon tub of saltfish, which it had scattered around. In the days that followed, the Bigfoot returned to the house every night for a week. Although it did no harm to people or property, the experience was too much for the family, and they left the house for good. One of the rare known cases of murder by Bigfoot is said to have occurred in 1943 at DeWild's Camp near Ruby, Alaska. The victim was John Meyer or McQuire, also called the Dutchman by the local Indians. He lived alone with his dogs in a cabin at the isolated camp, and one day in 1943 he is reported to have gone by boat to the nearest village and told how he had been attacked by the Bushmen, but his dogs had chased it away. However, the Dutchman died not long afterwards of internal bleeding caused by the attack. A Bigfoot whose witnessed activity sounds like that of an athlete in training was briefly seen by Alex Oakes on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, in the early 1940s. The 7-foot brown hair-covered creature crossed the road in front of Oakes as he drove near his home at Coombs. It crossed at high speed, hurdling the fences on both sides, and Oakes particularly noticed its 6-inch long shoulder hair streaming out behind. Another highway sighting was made in the spring of 1947 by a man and wife traveling on Old Highway 99 south of Shasta, California. They saw what they at first took to be a post beside the road, and thinking it indicated a washout, they stopped to see if the road ahead was clear. Then the post began to cross the road, and they realized it was in fact an 8 or 9 foot creature covered with long reddish-brown hair. It came up to the car and looked in at them, then went across the road to look at the bank before finally returning to its first location, where another similar creature was waiting. This, according to the witnesses, was clearly a female, and the male helped it across the road and up the bank. They walked into the trees with their arms around each other. Such behavior of apparent affection between two Bigfeet is rarely witnessed. The two seemed to have no fear of the onlookers, who said that the female never even looked their way. Was she blind, perhaps? This would explain the excessive care on the part of the male. It would also suggest that the Bigfeet are rather more human than animal, insofar as only humans, generally speaking, take care of their sick fellows. However, this is speculative thinking. Yet another roadway sighting, indicating what a high proportion of Bigfoot sightings do take place on roads, was made in 1947. This time, only a short distance from Vancouver, British Columbia. Mr. and Mrs. Werner came upon two naked creatures which they felt were not quite human. The description they gave contains several non-Bigfoot-like features. The creatures had a skin wrapped around them. Reports of clothed Bigfeet are rare. Both had bare feet and long shoulder-length hair, but there was no mention of hair-covered bodies. One carried a stick over one shoulder with a kind of bag tied to the end and appeared to be leading the smaller creature, whose hands may have been tied. But lest the reader wonder if these may merely have been humans, maybe somewhat demented or merely play-acting. The Werners also reported that the creatures that the leader one was about 8 feet tall and the smaller one 6 feet. Facially they had flat wide noses, small eyes, and bushy eyebrows. The Werners had not heard of Bigfoot and could only think they had seen some kind of wild man. In view of the uncharacteristic features of this sighting, we cannot be sure that they did see Bigfeet. But if they did, then it seems there are aspects to this creature which suggested it is rather more than an unknown ape. A grizzly bear, seen briefly and at a distance by an inexperienced witness, might be mistaken for a Bigfoot, but this would not explain all the detailed descriptions of creatures clearly not grizzlies, while many witnesses are well able to tell a grizzly from a Bigfoot. One such was Clayton Mack, a Balacola, British Columbia Indian who was a respected grizzly bear hunter and big game guide. He saw a Bigfoot in the 1940s while he was in a boat heading for Quatna to do some fishing, and in 1967 he described to Bigfoot hunters, John Green and Renee Dahinden, what he had seen. "I saw this thing walking on the beach, a light brown color, standing about 8 to 9 feet tall. I thought it was a big bear, but he didn't go down on his 4 legs. I was nosing right towards him, but I was about 400 yards away, so I didn't get a good look at his face. I kept wondering because he didn't go down on his 4 legs. He was right on the edge of the water. He stood up straight and looked at me, then turned and walked up to the timber. Then halfway up to the driftwood logs, he stopped and turned and looked at me, twisting his head round. I never seen a grizzly bear on its hind feet stand and twist round with just its head. They always turn the whole body and they go down on 4 feet to do it." Then he went on and got to the logs and walked on top of them. He got to the timber, its second growth, and it looked as though he just reached out and spread the trees apart as he walked through them. Young spruce and hemlock trees. Not long after the 1947 report of possible Bigfeet wearing rudimentary clothes already quoted, comes another such sighting from around 1950. The witness was a 10-year-old girl who later wrote her story in a letter to biologist then author Yvonne T. Sanderson after reading something he had written concerning Bigfoot. The relevant part of her letter follows. When, about 9 years ago, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, where, near the Eel River above Eureka, California, at the edge of a meadow near the river's edge. Under what circumstances, my family and I were fishing on the Eel River. We had been camped in the vicinity for about 2 weeks, and had had poor luck when it came to fishing. I used to go for a short walk before breakfast because there was a very pretty meadow about a mile or 2 from our camp, and I used to rise off the grass. I was only about 10 years old at the time, and the world of nature was something which both fascinated and enthralled me. I entered the meadow and proceeded to cross it in order to reach a small knoll at the other side. When I approached the foot of the knoll, I heard a sound. It was the sound of someone walking and, thought perhaps my little brother had followed me and was going to jump out and try to scare me. I hollered, "All right, stinker, I know you're there." Needless to say, it was not my brother that appeared. Instead, it was a creature that I will nay or forget as long as I live. He stepped out of the bushes and I froze like a statue. He or it was about 7 to 8 feet tall. He was covered with brown stuff that looked more like a soft down than fur. He had small eyes set close together and had a red look about them. His nose was very large and flat against his face. He had a large mouth with the strangest looking fangs that I have ever seen. His form was that of a human, and he had hands and feet of enormous size but very human looking. However, there was one thing that I have not mentioned, the strangest and most frightening thing of all. He had on clothes. Yes, that's right. They were tattered and torn and barely covered him, but they were still there. He made a horrible growling sound that I don't think could be imitated by any living thing. Believe me, I turned and ran as fast as I could. I reached camp winded and stayed scared all while we were there. If Bigfoot and the creature in this report really does sound like a Bigfoot, and is as well adapted to living in the wild as most reports suggest, why does he need to don tattered clothes? The only explanation that occurs to us is that this was a freak sighting, that the Bigfoot had found the old clothes somewhere, and having seen humans dressed in clothes, decided to copy them. The fact that the clothes barely covered him does suggest that they once had a smaller human owner. The clothed Bigfoot was so close to the young girl it could easily have injured her, had it wished to, but despite giving a horrible growl, it kept its distance. A Bigfoot seen near Orleans, California, one terrifying night in 1952, definitely acted in a menacing way but again did not attack, even though it was at one point face to face with the witness. Indeed, when the witness raised his fist, the Bigfoot backed off. If the creature did not really intend to attack the witness, why behave in the frightening way it did? Was it all a game? Was the Bigfoot trying to convey something to the witness? Or did it intend to kidnap him? That seems unlikely, for it had the chance but did not take it. The witness's account was sent in a letter to Bigfoot hunter Roger Patterson, and the man was later seen by John Green, who said he appeared to be serious about his story. I'd been reading a story written by Yvonne T. Sanderson about a Bigfoot monster that people had seen in Northern California. As I was reading the story, I suddenly had the eerie realization that I, too, had had a similar experience. As the story came snaking its way out of my subconscious, I began to remember more and more of what happened. I had a bad case of the jitters as the memory uncoiled. The first part of the story took me back to 1952, when I had gone down to Orleans to start preliminary work on a logging operation with two men by the names of Lee Vlary and Josh Russell. One evening, Josh told me Lee had gone up to Happy Camp, but not having transportation back, wanted me to take the Mercury and go up and get him. I had driven the extremely crooked and dangerous road up there, but not being able to find him, started back alone to Orleans. It had been raining very heavily, and after going back a few miles I found there had been a slide across the road. There was a man with a flashlight there who told me I could still get back to Orleans by way of a detour across the river. He said it was a dirt road that went through Bear Valley and would come out at the mouth of Bluff Creek a few miles below Orleans. I had been driving slowly down this road for about 20 miles, I guess, sort of daydreaming, when I saw it. Dimly in the headlights and the rain was the shaggy orangutan-like apparition of a human. For an instant I had the impression the shaggy hair of the creature was a hoary blue-gray in the headlights. An ogre. I remember thinking, but the thing swiftly backpedaled off the road and behind a tree. I automatically passed it off as imagination and drove on by the spot. Suddenly, without warning, the car went into a violent and unreasonable skid. I brought the car back under control, but for some reason glanced into the rearview mirror. In the dim light of the taillights and license display bulb, I thought I could see a savage-looking face looking through the rear glass. I continued on, and when I looked again there was no face, so again concluded it was imagination. I had gone another quarter mile, I guess, when across the road was a small 6-inch sapling. I stopped the car and got out, intending to drag it aside if possible. Suddenly I heard the swift thud of flying feet of something coming down the road. Reality was upon me, and I remember cursing myself for not paying attention to what I had previously seen. It was the shaggy, human-like monster I had seen in the headlights. It at once started circling around me, snarling and acting very menacing. It kept this circling up for some time and once came up quite close, and I could see its face reflected by the headlights much better. The eyes were round and rather luminous. the hair on top of its rather low and rounded head pretty short. Its eye teeth were far longer than a human's, also the chest and upper part of the torso was rather bare of hair and also leathery looking. It wasn't too tall, not much more than my own 5 feet 9 inches, although it had a stooped, long-armed posture. Then it suddenly changed tactics. It would stalk off down the road but would come charging back like a bat out of hell when I started toward the car. The hour was late, the thing was becoming more and more menacing, and I was almost paralyzed by this time, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, a plan of escape, born out of desperation, popped into my mind. Since the monster seemed to think I couldn't get away, why not, when it went down the road again, playing cat and mouse, try and get in the car and smash through the sapling? This I did, and sprang for the door of the car a dozen feet away. No sooner was I inside when there it was, trying to claw through the window. I jerked the car into gear, floored the accelerator, and can vividly remember the wet sapling glistening whitely in the headlights as the car slashed it aside. I remember then the scream of rage and frustration it then gave. It was a curious trumpeting sound like the scream of a stallion and the roar of a mad grizzly. The car then felt as though it were being held back by something half riding and attempting to stop it, but the powerful mercury proved too much for it, and after a couple of 100 yards I felt no more resistance. To top this unbelievable experience off, believe it or not, I promptly forgot the whole experience. Then and there it went out of my mind. Not even the next day when Lee asked me if I had seen anything unusual on that road last night did I remember. He had come later from Happy Camp with another man he hired to take him to Orleans. A few days later, an incident happened that should have brought the experience back but didn't. Lee noticed a big dent in the grill of the car and asked me how it got there. I told him I didn't know. Incidentally, Lee told me that something had tried to push them off the road when they came through on the detour. He said there's something strange going on around here and let the matter drop. A Bigfoot seen in Georgia on August 1, 1955, really did act violently towards the witnesses, but it may have done so in self-defense, or at least revenge. 20-year-old Joseph Whaley was alone on the Braunwood-Smithville Highway, near the community of Kinchafanikri, cutting grass and undergrowth with a scythe. He heard a strange noise and, going into the woods to investigate, saw a creature at least 6 feet tall and covered with shaggy gray hair. It had tusk-like teeth and pointed ears and reminded him of a gorilla, though it was also man-like. It was orienting like a wild pig as it kept walking towards him. Whaley, not surprisingly frightened, swung his scythe at it and hit it in the chest and arms, but it kept coming and Whaley retreated to his jeep, intending to call for help on his radio, but he could not get through, and before he could start the engine and drive away, the creature was upon him and had scratched his arm and shoulder and torn his shirt. He jumped out of the jeep and kept it between him and the beast. Then, with the creature following him, moving in a lumbering and slow-moving manner, he ran into the woods and then doubled back to his jeep, getting it started and managing to drive off before the creature could return. When we remember the athletic Bigfoot described earlier, and indeed many other reports of fast-moving creatures, this report of a lumbering and slow-moving beast sounds unlike Bigfoot. Yet the physical description fits Bigfoot. As we also have noted, the Bigfoot phenomenon abounds in contradictions. These stories, which focus on Bigfoot sightings, exclude cases where only evidence, such as footprints, has been found without an actual sighting of the creature. However, there is one case which we felt we had to include, even though no Bigfoot was seen. The witness, Mrs. Darwin Johnson, had a most frightening experience while swimming in the Ohio River near Dogtown, Indiana, on the 14th or August 21, 1955, and all the evidence we have suggests that a Bigfoot was to blame for her understandable terror. When she was about 15 feet from the shore, a large furry hand with claws grabbed her knee and pulled her under the water. She barely escaped by grabbing onto her friend's inner tube and pulling away from the creature. It then ran off into the trees. She later saw she had scratches on her leg from the Bigfoot grabbing her there and had an imprint on her leg of the creature's hand for a few days. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the mysterious world of Bigfoot and the untold sightings from 1941 to 1960. The legends may fade, but the mystery remains. Could Bigfoot still be out there, defying the odds and surviving the ages? Share your thoughts and any encounters you've heard of in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this ongoing saga. Until then, keep your eyes open and your stories alive. See you in the next one. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the mysterious world of Bigfoot and the untold sightings from 1941 to 1960. The legends may fade, but the mystery remains. Could Bigfoot still be out there, defying the odds and surviving the ages? Share your thoughts and any encounters you've heard of in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this ongoing saga. Until then, keep your eyes open and your stories alive. See you in the next one.